What's up guys, I'm Jacob Suggs and welcome back to another video, and today we're not talking about Cloverfield or anything like that, but we are talking about something kind of mysterious, and I think you're gonna like it. If you didn't know, I'm a massive fan of Black Mirror. I love seasons 1, 2, and 3. It's on Netflix. If you haven't seen it, you can check out all of the previous seasons and the current season there too. I'm not sponsored by Netflix, but that's where you can watch the show. And so whenever they announced that they were making a 4th season, I got very excited because if you didn't know, much like Cloverfield and other like Twilight Zone-esque things, Black Mirror is essentially a show that is an anthology that loosely kind of connects its episodes together. It's very ambiguous. However, each episode leaves you just completely distraught, in a mess, and sometimes leaves you absolutely speechless. It messes with your mind, and it's a show that I absolutely love. Many people have said that it's a Twilight Zone for a modern era, and I would absolutely agree. That being said, I know it's been out for a while now, and I haven't reviewed it or anything yet, and that's because, you see, I'm in something called college. It keeps me busy, and so because of that, and because of break and me being super busy lately, I haven't been able to finish it. However, I finished it last night, and now I can finally talk about it because, man, there's a lot to talk about. And if you haven't seen season 4, do not worry, you are safe here. I'm not going to talk about spoilers or anything like that. I'm just going to kind of give my basic thoughts on each episode, and then in the end kind of tie up my thoughts on the entire season as a whole. So that being said, let's just hop right into it. USS Callister is probably one of my favorite episodes of Black Mirror season 4, if not one of my favorite episodes of Black Mirror ever. Literally, this episode was everything that I wanted it to be, and ever since I first saw the teaser trailer for this particular episode, I've been just dying to watch it, and it did not let me down. If you don't know what USS Callister is about, it's basically about a woman who wakes up in a Star Trek-like environment, and she has to deal with a captain who's not so willing to listen to certain demands. Like I said, I'm trying to be vague about this stuff. If you've seen the episode, please be courteous of the people down in the comments below that may not have seen it. But I feel like that's a pretty vague description of this episode, but I can tell you right off the bat that pretty much everything about this episode I absolutely loved. This is for sure one of the most colorful episodes of Black Mirror that I've ever seen. The vibrant purple and neon colors throughout the episode not only help it feel like a classic episode of Star Trek or some science fiction serial show, it just helps it stand out in general. However, the bright colors perfectly contrast with the very deep, dark, distressing subtext that this episode has going for it. I guess you could say this episode's boldly going where no one has gone before. Catch my drift? But it's honestly a very disturbing and great commentary about how one person handles power and technology. In fact, the majority of Black Mirror as a whole, and the season in particular, kind of deals with how technology is shaping us as a society and shapes us as individuals. I mean, I'm using my phone for my thoughts right now. I mean, essentially, technology is how I'm communicating to you guys right now, even though in reality, I'm just talking to my camera. And so I definitely think that it's something that's important to bring up, and everything about this episode, it had me on edge the entire time. The score for this episode was fantastic, the cinematography was amazing, the bright colors contrasted perfectly with the tone, and I'm gonna give USS Callister a 9 out of 10. I loved it that much, and it's probably my favorite episode of the entire season, and one of my favorite episodes of this show, probably to date. Alright, let's talk about Archangel. There's been some hate for this episode online. Some people have said that it's a weaker episode of Black Mirror, but I'm just gonna be straight up honest, I don't really think so. The episode does remind me a lot of the episode White Christmas, which was the Black Mirror Christmas special. However, to be perfectly honest with you, I feel like it stands as an episode on its own fairly well, so yeah, you can draw comparisons, and sure, White Christmas did a similar concept in a better and different way, if you're asking me. However, that being said, I still think that Archangel has some things going for it that White Christmas didn't necessarily have, particularly a family dynamic. It's both fascinating and heartbreaking to see a young girl and her mother's relationship change as she grows up, and also learns that her mother has a hard time letting go of her and, growing up in general and becoming a unique individual. And we all have to grow up sometime, and sometimes that's really difficult for a parent to deal with, but if you really love something, you'll let it go and grow and develop. And I think that's the main point of this episode, and to be honest with you, I feel like it handled it very well. That is a really scary concept. The fact that somebody could watch every single thing that you do and you have no idea. I mean, kind of brings up some Alexa, Siri, NSA kind of questions, and I think that's important. I'm gonna give Archangel an 8.5 out of 10. I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was a really intriguing concept and a really scary concept. It's a heartbreaking story, but to be honest with you, you can see both the mother's side and the daughter's side, and the fact that you can see both sides and kind of agree with both of them says something about the quality of how this episode was made. Alright, Crocodile. Crocodile is all about dealing with past sins and how your sins will always find you. It's a lesson that we've been told 1,000 times before, however, maybe not as intense of a way as how this episode represents the theme. We see how one woman is haunted by her past, and how in a series of non-connected incidents, her past kind of seems to catch up with her after all these years. And she's had a family, she has a husband, she has a kid. When you have an incredibly dark secret that you don't want to get out, it's really even more difficult to express your thoughts on that really dark secret once all of these years have passed by and your life is completely different. And I also love how her past is kind of indirectly, directly coming back to her, because it's essentially a series of non-linear, non-connected events that lead back to her past and that mistake that she made all those years ago. This episode really kept me on edge. There's a lot of scenes that really stressed me out, and it's insane seeing how this character is kind of reverse developing. She's going from somebody that has a good heart to someone that does unspeakable things by the end of the episode that I don't really want to get into, and I thought that was a really cool concept as well as a really disturbing one as well. I'm gonna give Crocodile a 7.5 out of 10. There are some moments that kind of dragged for me in this episode, but overall it's still a really good episode. It's just compared to the previous two that I saw beforehand, it's just not as strong as those, but I really, really dug this episode, don't get me wrong. Alright, Hang the DJ. Hang the DJ is the Black Mirror episode that you hear everybody talking about on Twitter and social media. Everybody's been telling everybody to watch this episode, and honestly for good reason, because it's amazing. I loved this episode so much. It's a really interesting concept, seeing how we have things like Tinder and all of these dating apps. Like, what if one of those apps perfectly told you how to match with somebody and how many years you would be compatible with that person? That's kind of insane. And it's the chemistry of both the man and the woman in this episode that really helped this episode to stand out. If they didn't have that well of chemistry, then maybe this episode wouldn't be as strong, but their chemistry and charisma and connection with one another works perfectly and kind of reinforces the themes and concepts as the episode goes on. To me, this episode perfectly captures what it's like to be in a relationship, and both the happy times and the bad times and the hardships. It perfectly demonstrates that and perfectly executes that in a way that I haven't seen a movie or television show do in quite some time. This entire episode was fantastic, and if you haven't seen an episode of Black Mirror, I would definitely recommend maybe starting with this, even over USS Callister and the other episodes that I've talked about. Honestly, I feel like this is a really good place to introduce somebody that hasn't seen the show, and if you haven't seen Black Mirror, this is a good jumping off point to start. I really loved this episode. I'm gonna give it a 9. This episode was absolutely fantastic. Alright, Metalhead. I watched this episode last night. I thought that this episode was pretty good for the most part. I thought that it dragged a little bit, and although it has some apocalyptic and dystopian themes that we've seen in both cinema and television before, I feel like the end of this episode made it stand out. If it wasn't for the big twist at the end of the episode, which I don't want to get into, then this episode might just be okay. However, it ties stuff in with some other Black Mirror episodes that I also don't want to get into if you haven't seen this episode. So honestly, I thought this episode was pretty good, but if it didn't tie in those connections, or if it didn't have that really cool, interesting concept at the end of the episode, then it would just be kind of alright to mediocre. I will say that I did like how this episode was shot in black and white, because you can kind of get away with showing a little bit more gritty and disturbing material when it's in black and white, because you're not showing the graphicness of the colors and stuff like that. So I do appreciate how they were kind of able to push the boundaries for this episode. But that being said, if it wasn't for the twist at the end of this episode, I don't know how well this episode would sit with me. Even after watching it, I just kind of thought it was alright. I'm gonna give Metalhead a 7 though, because I still really enjoyed it. It's a good episode of Black Mirror, it's just not the best episode, and it kind of just reinforces themes about technology and society that we've seen in other episodes in a lesser than stellar way than those episodes did it. So to me, I just thought this episode was kind of alright. You might think it's amazing. If you do, that's awesome. But yeah, it's still a good time, I guess. Alright, and Black Museum. Black Museum is an episode that I really loved. In fact, it's my favorite episode of this entire season, following USS Callister. This episode ties the Black Mirror universe together in a way that we really haven't seen before. In fact, it was completely blowing my mind watching it last night. In fact, I would go as far to say that this episode feels like a traditional classic Black Mirror episode, and it gives you kind of what you would expect in 3 separate anthology tales. However, one of those things is not like the other 2 stories. And even then, the other 2 stories in this episode are just as captivating. This museum in this episode is one big tribute to the other episodes of Black Mirror. That's a really awesome idea. I love how it takes all of the loose ends that connect certain episodes together and perfectly weaves them together to where you can be like, yeah, that absolutely makes sense. I can see how this is in the same universe as this episode. It just perfectly adds up. They even mentioned some stuff about Season 3 episodes in Season 4, which I love to catch on to. I love little Easter eggs like that. So I thought it was really cool how they connected all of the dots together. I will say, though, that this episode has some less than subtle political commentary. They really hit it pretty straight on at the end of this episode, and I don't want to get political because I don't like to talk about politics on my channel. However, I'm just gonna say that the politics didn't rub me the right way. I felt like it was just kind of forced, to be honest with you, a little bit. But the episode itself is still great. Just because a conservative writes a story or a liberal writes a story, that doesn't mean that I'm not gonna like those stories if I don't side with one of those sides. I mean, a good story is just a good story no matter who writes it, and that being said, and looking at it through that viewpoint, this is a great story that connects Black Mirror together in a way that we really haven't seen it been connected before. I really dug Black Museum. I thought it was a great episode of Black Mirror. I didn't necessarily agree with the not-so-subtle politics at the end of the episode, but like I said, that's just my personal opinion on politics. So that being said, that's just my personal opinion, and I'm not going to let my subjective opinion affect my subjective views on an episode of Black Mirror, because it's just, I don't like to tie those 2 things together. Movies need to stand on their own, so do TV shows. I could care less about that stuff. With that being said, I highly recommend that you watch this season. I really loved it. I thought it was great. And if you haven't seen Black Mirror before, you're in for a ride, because this show is just insane and not afraid to cross the line whatsoever. That being said, what did you think of Black Mirror Season 4? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Did you find any loose connections that maybe I possibly missed? If so, let me know down in the comments below, because I'd love to talk about it there. And as always, I'm Frame by Frame. Remember the name. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, guys.